Hello, this is John from. In this tutorial we're going to look at inner classes in Java. So I've created a class in Eclipse that has a main method, and I'm going to create a new class here, and we're going to give this new class some inner classes. So I'm going to right click my package here and go to new class, and I'll call this class robot just to have some kind of an example to work with. Click finish. I don't want a main method in it actually, and I'm going to give robot some instance data, and just again, it's just as an example, I'm going to give it a private static, no, not private, not static, sorry, private int ID. That'll do. So every robot has an ID, and I'm also going to implement a constructor so that we can set the ID. And to do that, I'm going to right click and go to source and generate constructor using fields, tick ID, and click OK. So I could have just typed this myself, but that was quicker. I'll get rid of super here because that's not, call to super is not needed. So the constructor just takes an ID and sets this private field using the ID passed in. So now of course we can create robots already. Let's give this one more method actually. Let's give it a public void start method, and in start I'll just put a sys out, and I'll say starting robot plus ID there. So now I can use that by going to my main method here and creating a robot. Set that equal to a new robot. I'll pass it the ID 7 and then click do robot.start like that. Okay, so that's all pretty straightforward, starting robot 7. Now let's take a look at inner classes. So there's three main kind of cases here that I can think of. We've already looked at anonymous classes in this series of tutorials, and anonymous classes are a kind of inner class. We're going to look at three more cases here. So in Java you can declare classes actually pretty well anywhere, and we've seen in previous tutorials that you could declare a class here or here. The only rule is that you can only have one public top level class in each file, and the name of it's got to match the name of the file. So this is robot in robot.java. But I can declare a class within the robot class. And let's look first at non-static inner classes, or nested classes they're also called. So I can declare a class here. I can say class, let's say brain, like this. And this class will now have access to the instance data of the robot class. So let's give this maybe one method, public void think. So the brain thinks, and we could have a sys out in here and say robot plus ID plus is thinking. So I'm accessing here. I could give class instance data itself, but the point I'm trying to make is that I'm accessing non-static, I'm accessing instance data of the outer robot class here within this inner class. And then I could do stuff like in my start method of robot, I could say, for example, brain equals new brain, and brain dot, not Brian, that's my brother's name actually, brain dot think. Now if I run this, let's go to app.java and run it. It says robot 7 is thinking. So this is a nested class, or an inner class, and classes like this, what they're probably most often used for is just logically grouping bits of outer classes. Like here, the robot might be made up of it might have a brain and legs and heart and so on. I don't know about heart, but different parts of it anyway. And we can group those different parts if we want to using inner classes, and I can use the access modifiers, like this probably should be private, and that would work just fine. Now, actually, you can also, I'm going to show you something here that's a little bit weird, but if you've understood what I'm saying so far, basically that's the end of it, really. And in fact, you can find a really good example of using an inner class if you look at in this series of tutorials. I've got a video on implementing the iterable interface in collections, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you can find that by going to the Cave of Programming channel and looking for my collections videos. If you're watching on Udemy or somewhere else, I think on udemy.com I've incorporated the collections videos as part of Java for Beginners, and you can find the link to the Udemy course by going to www.caveofprogramming.com. But under the collections section of this series, I've got a video on implementing iterable, and that uses a inner class like this to implement an iterator, which then can iterate through the data of the enclosing class, the instance data of the enclosing class, and that's a classic example of this. And if you want to test your skills with this, you could try implementing the iterable interface in Java, maybe after watching that video. Now, you might wonder if you can create separate classes of this brain here from outside the robot class, and the answer is yes, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone really do that. It is common to use inner classes like this outside of the class that they are declared in, but then usually you'll have a method that would create a instance of your inner class and return it. And you can see that if you implement iterable, for example. There is another weird syntax that I'm just going to show you for the sake of completeness here, which is that if we were to make this public like that, in app.java here, we've got an instance of robot here, and we could in fact do this. We could say robot.brain. So robot.brain is the type here. We've got robot with the inner class brain. Let's call this variable brain equals, and now we need an instance of the robot class, and we say robot.new brain. I think I've got that right. And I've never actually seen anyone do this, so I wouldn't really worry about it. I just wanted to show you for completeness, and then we can use this brain outside of robot. So I click run, and it says robot 7 is thinking again. Now, once again, you'll notice that when you create an instance of robot, you do not automatically create an instance of the inner classes. You have to do it explicitly somewhere, and that's pretty much always done within the class itself, within some method. But you can, as you can see, do it outside the class with this weird syntax here. But I've just never seen anyone actually do that. I don't really know why you'd need to do it. And it's much more common to make the inner classes like private, or just not give an access specifier, in which case they'll default to, I guess, package level access. So this is only going to work if the brain was declared public. So let's save that. So that's inner classes, and they're normally used like this within the enclosing class, and you might have a method that returns, for example, brain. In this case, this could return brain. That would also be pretty typical. Now, a second kind of inner class are static inner classes, which are pretty simple actually. So we could have here, for example, let's say battery. We could have a static class battery like that. Put the brackets in, and that could have a method, let's say public void charge, that charges the battery. And let's just say in here, whoops, get rid of that, don't want that. And that should be, I do want that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so public void charge, and let's just put sys out in here and just say battery charging. Now, because this is static, we can't refer to this ID. And by all means, type this code out for yourself and try it out and check that that is the case. But I could not do, for example, plus ID here. That would give me an error unless I were to declare ID static, and a static in a class can access static instance variables of the enclosing outer class. But what you usually use static inner classes for it's just a way of grouping classes together. So let's say in this case you've got robots, and they can have interchangeable batteries. So you might want to create a robot battery outside of this class and then pass it to whatever robots need that charged battery. So we could do here outside of the robot class, we could say robot.battery equals new robot.battery. And this syntax, unlike this syntax is actually pretty typical and very common in Java, or pretty common. And then we can say battery.charge. And then let's run this, and it says battery charging. So non-static inner classes are used where you need to group together some functionality, and you need the class to have access to the instance variables of the enclosing outer class. Static inner classes are used, let's make this public to be explicit. Static inner classes are used basically where you just want a normal class that isn't associated with instances of the enclosing outer class, but you want, for some reason, you want to group it with the outer class. So you could have robot.battery, robot.CPU, whatever you like, but the point is it's grouped with robot. And other than that, apart from that, it's really just a normal class. So the static inner classes are like normal classes that just happen to be grouped with other classes, and you use this kind of dot syntax. Now there is finally one last thing that I should tell you about, which is that you can declare classes even within methods. And so I could say here like class temp, I don't know, maybe like that. And this would have access to ID. So let's give it a method, public void do something like that. And we could say here sysal ID is plus ID. It would also have access to stuff we declare in here. So if I say string name equals Robert the robot, we could say here sysal my name is plus name. Let's save that, and the error will surely go away. What have I done? Oh yeah, but I forgot. This will work, but this has to be final, and this follows the same rules for like anonymous classes, that if you have a method in an anonymous class, and we've seen this before, it can only refer to local data if it's final, but it can refer to instance data absolutely fine. And then, so we haven't got an instance of this class yet, but we could create one by saying temp equals new temp. That's creating the instance. And then we can say temp.do something. And when we run this start method, of course, now we are going to do all this. We're going to create this temp type and declare an instance of it and run the do something method. So I'll run this like this. Battery charging. There we go. My name is Robert. All that stuff. So again, this is sometimes useful. It's not completely uncommon. Maybe it's most often useful if you need an instance of a class to pass to another method, and for some reason you don't want to use an anonymous in a class, which you could do. You just want a class that you only want to use in this method. Create instance of it only in this method, because you can't refer to this now outside this method, and you can't make it private or public or protected or anything either, because the scope of this type, as well as these, of course, the variables, is between these brackets here. It's scoped to this method. So that's inner classes in Java. It's actually relatively simple, and if it seems confusing, that's just because you haven't practiced it. And I'd recommend typing out some code and trying to think of some little scenario yourself and create a class of each different type. The nested class like this, the static inner class like this, and a kind of, I'm not sure what to call this, but kind of a local class as well. And you'll soon get the hang of it. And if you want some advanced practice, try implementing iterable in Java, and you can watch my video on that, as I said before. That's it for this tutorial, and there's going to be more tutorials in this course, of course. There'll be more tutorials in this course, certainly, and I plan to tackle enum and serialization and stuff like that. So stay tuned, and you'll find all my latest stuff on there. So that's it for this time, and until next time, happy coding.